Hello, this is Chris Ott, and today I'm going to be talking about evolution. And here I'm talking about biological evolution. The evolution of forms, the rise of species. Now, I have this computer here so that I can look things up if I need to. But I have not prepared for this talk in the way I have other talks in the past. I often prepare a PowerPoint presentation and then I follow my slides. Here I'm going to speak extemporaneously, and then I'm going to edit images into this video. Overlay them to illustrate what I'm talking about. Okay. First of all, let me say something about the controversy that continues to be waged between Darwinian evolution as presented in the middle of the 19th century by Charles Darwin in Origin of Species, and on the other side, the resistance to that idea by in America by the Christian representatives of Christianity, who find the idea offensive. And we have to, I want to say that both sides in this controversy have something that they're really, they have, their dog in the fight isn't obvious. You have to know what ultimately they're protecting or they're fighting against. First of all, the Darwinians, let's call them the Darwinians, and we'll call the others the intelligent design advocates. Okay. The Darwinians are materialists, and they are opposed to the notion of God. They don't like the idea of God as a creative force. And that's always been part of the motive of the development of an alternative. See, prior to Darwin's theory, scientific people usually called themselves deists. That means that while they could find an alternative to God in most things, in most processes that occur in the world, and replace God with things like natural laws, they couldn't see how we got here, except that God created us, much like it says in Genesis, where God created Adam and Eve. So to sort of distance themselves from pure theists, they called themselves deists. There had to be some kind of deity. But the idea was popular in the early 19th century that whatever this God was probably created the world, because they couldn't see any other way that it could be here. Created it ex nihilo, out of nothing, like Genesis says. And that after that, he left it alone because it could operate by itself. It's sort of like you wind up a watch and it'll work by itself. So the world worked kind of like a machine by natural laws, and it didn't require God's attention after creating the world. That's what deism is. Darwin kind of brought an end to that because he gave the hope, although his theory only presented a theory of how you get species from earlier species of living animals, you still, they felt hopeful that the rest could be gradually filled in. And then, and over time, they've added other pieces, like in the 1920s, the Big Bang theory, which is trying to get how you get everything out of nothing, Well, today we're not going to talk about the Big Bang theory. We're just going to talk about Darwin's theory of species, evolution. Now, that's what the prime motive for the scientists is, really the elimination of God. And they'll try to deny that, but it's what they mean by a natural explanation, meaning it's an explanation that doesn't require God or any intelligence. It doesn't require an intelligence or an intelligent being or a designer or a creator. That somehow it came about naturally, by which they mean accidentally. So by accidents. So now, now what is it that the intelligent designers want? The intelligent designers are not looking for a theory like my own that I've been presenting in my writing and in these talks, where a world comes about by a fascinating process other than my materialist one. They are looking to save Genesis and the idea that the world was created in a few days by God and was planned and had a design, and God thought it out and created it magically. And that's the real motive. And the Darwinists, or the materialists, they know that. And this is why they constantly call out the intelligent design advocates on this unstated agenda. So that's the positive part of the agenda of the intelligent designers, is the desire to create arguments for the creation myth in Genesis. But there's also a negative part. There's a part that they don't like, just like the materialists don't like the God thing, because that's their desire is mainly negative. But there's a part in the intelligent design advocates that's negative too. They find the notion that, aside from the biblical arguments that they make, they find the notion that man evolved from apes repugnant. And, we don't need to repeat what the complaint that Darwinists make all the time, that's a misunderstanding. We didn't evolve from the apes. We have common ancestors, with the apes. It's all off point. It doesn't matter. The Darwinist idea is that we evolved from hominids, and we are hominids. We walk on two legs. We're upright creatures. And the hominids evolved from four-legged creatures, and so on. Now, the reason that this disturbs the religious-minded, well, we could we can only guess, but it's sort of it's not very, what's the word? It seems to be an undignified view of humanity, instead of as God's sublime, perfect creation, man, his gem, his jewel. We're just, we become just an animal, just another animal, maybe with some higher order functions, like thinking and language. But also, creation has no purpose. Creation just becomes sort of a random bunch of accidents, and that we're not even done. So all of this is very unsettling for the intelligent design advocate too. So that's a negative part. It doesn't like the notion that we evolved from apes. I want to point out that a person who is very unobservant could think that the things that I've been saying fall on the side with the intelligent design advocates, but it doesn't. First of all, I believe that we evolved from apes, we evolved from hominids, and them from four-legged creatures. However, like them, and I take this from Mayor Baba's writing, so this isn't some scientific point, it's just a point of faith for me, but I do have arguments for it, is that man is not just a pointless step going nowhere, but the man is that perfect creature that is God's gem, it's diamond, because that's the form in which a soul can become God realized. That's the point of that. Your brain, your body are adequate for their purpose, and therefore they're perfect in that they achieve their purpose. Okay, so I wanted to say that I share that, share some things, not others. Also, with the materialists, I also share. Even though I talked in several of my talks about intelligence being a necessary existence before things can evolve, apparently, in my system, I don't mean an intelligent designer. And the reason I'm saying that, the reason is because designing something like an architect or inventing something requires a whole lot of dimensions of thought that only come much later in the development of my evolution. For instance, I've been spending the last 20 years designing a paradigm for understanding reality. But the thinking that I use to do that, and the language, and the ability to read, and the ability to understand other people's ideas, those things didn't exist before the evolution of dirt. They had to come about as a result of an evolution. So I would definitely object to the idea that there could have been a designer, because to imagine a designer before evolution is to ignore the fact that there are necessary preconditions for the ability to design. And so, as I said, it's a priori. Everybody knows upon reflection that something cannot exist until the necessary preconditions for its existence exist. So intelligent design is impossible in my system. Even a conscious designer is impossible, because consciousness is something that grows out of my system, and also out of Mayor Baba's system. The major chapter of Mayor Baba's opus book is The Evolution of Consciousness, in which he says that evolution that we perceive, the relics of, is actually the byproduct of a consciousness factory. So consciousness came about also as a result of the evolution that I described. And therefore, there cannot possibly be a conscious designer that designed the world. Okay. Now, I also, in a sense, I don't think that God created the world, that the way that is imagined, Mir Baba, I was told, once said, "Who said God created the world? You created it in your own ignorance." The world comes about as the result of an evolution of God becoming conscious and finding himself as the imaginer. God never created anything. There are so many reasons why that has to be true. If we understand God as Mir Baba defines God, or even the infinite intelligence is designed by him in an alternative wording, that infinite intelligence is without limit. It's reality without limit. There isn't anything else. If there was something else, it would displace God, and then God would be finite, and then God wouldn't be God by definition. So God has to include all, and therefore God cannot create anything that is other than himself. Therefore creation is impossible. Okay, the only thing that can be created is the impressions that create the appearance of a world. All right. Now I want to get to the point that I'm going to be arguing now. I actually am sure that Mir Baba was not teaching Darwinism. As a matter of fact, it says it right in the introduction of the book by the editors, that God Speaks does not teach an evolution that happened because of natural selection, but because of an urge to obtain consciousness. Now, I'm going to show problems in the Darwinian model. And when I'm talking, I am not talking about the fact that certain species lived before others, okay? And that some evolved, millions of years ago, and some evolved, more recently. Well, the most recent, probably even in the millions. But some evolved hundreds of millions of years ago, and some evolved, 3 million. So, we're not objecting to that. What we're going to object to is the control mechanism that made it happen, all right? Now, there's a lot of literature about this that's very good, that I haven't read nearly enough of, but it's not necessary, because I've got enough arguments. I don't need too many. But the intelligent design writers it has to be admitted that their negative arguments against Darwinian evolution as presented in theory are very good arguments. They're very good negative arguments. Now, I actually don't use many of their arguments, if any. I have my own, but that writing is worth looking at for the negative arguments. That means where they see scientific problems and contradictions in the evolution theory, the way the forms came about. The problem with that literature is in the positive argument. The positive argument is what they're opening up space for, which is the argument that God created the world in a few days, and they actually do try to find archaeological evidence that the world was created in a few days. Okay, and so that argument is weak. The other arguments are strong, or this is my opinion, and it's the opinion of Thomas Nagel at the University of New York, who wrote Mind and Cosmos, which I've mentioned so many times, just because it's a convenient book. 2012, Thomas Nagel, Mind and Cosmos, where he says that very thing, that these arguments by the intelligent design people the negative arguments should be looked at because they have a point. And he's pretty much accepted their point, that there's something wrong with Darwinism. He hasn't accepted their positive argument. He doesn't believe in, he's an atheist, he doesn't believe in God, and he certainly doesn't believe in the six-day creation. So, now, I want to point out now, this is going to be my first negative argument toward Darwinian evolution. This is an argument, in essence, it's an argument against the way Darwinists make their argument. Probably, for those who are not familiar with it, I should just quickly explain how Darwinism explains how you get new species, okay? The idea is that, I'm going to do this very briefly, okay, because I want to get to my point. The idea is that there are always constantly random mutations on a genetic level in plants and animals, all the time. They're always making a mistake. It's kind of like when they copy their genes, much like when you make a copy from a Xerox machine. Every time you make a copy from a copy from a copy, it has little mistakes. So if you lived in the time of Xerox machines, sometimes you got a copy that you couldn't even read or see the picture hardly, because it was a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. So that's what they mean. In the DNA, there's a when it divides, there's an error. Okay. Now the notion is that some of these errors happen to be when had accumulatively, they can, at least in theory, lead to some very useful innovations in the form of the creature. So, for instance, enough mutations making a tail longer will make a monkey have a tail so long it can use it like a hand when it's climbing. Okay, so the notion is that that tail is created by accidental mutations. Though what preserves those to be passed on to the young, those beneficial mutations, is that because they're beneficial, the creature has more offspring. And you can just do the numbers. It's purely a number thing. Then that gene will be passed on just by numbers because it's being duplicated more. That's it. That's it. Now, so all the rest is superfluous. Now, first of all, let me just take the one about the tail, because this one, it wasn't the first one I was going to describe, but I want to say something about a tail. And I'm going to illustrate this with some pictures that you'll see on the screen. Let's just take monkeys and their tails, all right? Some monkeys have a long tail that can be used like vestigially, like a finger, like you can grab hold of a branch and it can swing by its tail. Very long and curly, and it has a lot of control over it. Some monkeys, they don't have a tail at all. We're kind of like them. We have a vestigial little piece of what was a tail, but it doesn't usually stick out anymore. And a lot of the higher apes don't have a tail, or have a little bush like a bunny, and or none at all, as in the gorilla. So let's just take evolution that's going on supposedly all the time, and let's say you're getting random mutations that make a tail a centimeter longer. It's a genetic mistake, but what it does is it makes the tail a centimeter longer. Now, a centimeter longer from some intermediary length, say, where the tail is neither in the way nor useful. Well, 1 centimeter is not going to make the tail any better or worse. There's nothing to select. There's no reason that creature with a centimeter longer tail is going to be picked by a mate more quickly and have more children. Now, the same happens for the monkey has a tail that's a centimeter shorter. Again, there's no reason to select for a centimeter shorter tail, because it's neither good nor bad. It's not going to make you live longer or shorter. It's kind of irrelevant. Now, for every mutation that you have that the tail is shorter, statistically you have a mutation that makes the tail longer. So the two should cancel each other out. It's true. The notion that that you just get mutations that make it longer over 1 million years until it finally is useful is absurd, because there's no reason to be selecting for something that's only going to become useful in 1 million years. It's kind of, you think about it. Now, Darwinists have arguments against that kind of argument. They say, well, there is some use for a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. They argue, but their thinking is kind of like putting the cart before the horse. They already have their answer, and they're just looking for something to save it. Because you kind of like, if you're looking to find claim some use for something, you can always claim something if you think hard enough. Anyway, now the next thing is very important, and it's a very different kind of argument, because it's an argument against the way Darwinism, the thinking that's in Darwinism. There are a couple paradigm examples that are given to people when they're being taught about Darwin's evolution. They're paradigm cases that every high school and college biology kid learned. And if they were paying attention, they know them. And the most common is the story of the moths. The moths is a paradigm case that is supposed to convey how Darwinian natural selection works. And it also has in it the notion that it's happening all the time. It's happening right now. Okay, I'm going to show a problem with this. Okay, in the late 1800s, people were I don't know how they heated their homes before they started heating their homes with coal. But once the coal revolution got started in London, the smokestacks put out a lot of soot. And from that we get smog and stuff. And this soot was in the air. And there was a forest of near London that had originally had trees that were kind of gray. But the soot turned the trees dark. Like if you ever saw Oliver, no, I don't know, is it in Oliver? Mary Poppins. Chimney sweeps are black, okay? The soot is black, it blackens everything. So the trees darkened. Now, prior to the trees darkening, when they were like gray bark, they were moths that flew around in that forest. And the moths were of two colors. And let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's just say white and black. They're sort of, toward the white and black moths. Now, when the trees were in their original clean state, there were more white moths. Now, the reason there were more white moths is because when they were on the trees, the birds would pick them off because they could see them. So when the trees were white, the birds could see the black moths really better than the white moths. So they ate them, so there was always less black moths. Now, as the trees darkened, the birds, it reversed. And the black moths could sort of get some camouflage and hide from the birds. And so the birds could see the white moths suddenly better than the black moths. So the birds started eating, of course, the ones they could see. And so you gradually had more black moths. All right, that's the story. There's the evolution. They evolved from white to black. Now, there's a problem. Darwin was not a philosopher. I don't know that he came up with that example. I don't know, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but whoever did was not a good thinker, because it's not defined what a species is. Now, I'm going to define it, okay? And I'm going to define it in Mirababa's terminology, okay? What we're looking for by evolution is not a change of the same species but a different color, okay? But an actual change in the form. Mirababa used the word form. Now the word form means shape. Now I'm going to put put pictures here of some animals that you'll immediately recognize simply by their form. Now we could even, these are just silhouettes for simplification, but it shows how easy they are recognizable from their form. Now I know the form is more complicated than that silhouette, and there are different organ shapes and such, and so we could do a three-dimensional version of the same thing, and it would still, we could call it the form, the shape, the full three-dimensional geometric shape, including the organs and everything. Now, what we want to know, we're going to define evolution here. Before we look for it, what we're looking for is, how does one form arise that didn't exist before? That's what we want to know. That's what we mean by evolution. That's our unfolding of the species. Evolution originally means unfolding, like unfolding a book. How do you get the new pages? How do you get completely new animals, okay? So we're going to avoid words like species and genus and stuff for now, because that's just, we have to see the problem before we get confused by our language, okay? Now, obviously, the moths are the same shape, whether they're black or white. And I want to give an analogy to show the terrible flaw in this analogy of the moths. Imagine there is a country with an equal number of black people and white people, and then a terrible tyrant, takes over the country, and he's a bigot, and he orders the killing of all the black people. And now, after a while, you have all white people. Okay. Well, that's not the black people didn't evolve into white people. You just killed them. Okay. You're weeding out one thing, and what you're left with was always there. The point of that is that in many instances of examples of evolution that Darwinists give, that's going on all the time, all around us, there's no actual evolution, because whatever is at the end of that process was already there at the beginning of the process. For instance, there's nothing in natural selection that can create a new DNA. All it can do is create a damage to old DNA. Okay? There's no creative power in evolution. It's only selective. So somebody said, well, it sort of accounts for the selection of the fittest, but not the survival of the fittest, but not the arrival of the fittest. Where are you getting the things that are being selected? Well, their examples don't show anything that's being given that wasn't there before. So, let me give another example. It's very common for Darwinists to change to the subject, hoping to intimidate you by talking about where they work in laboratories on viruses, okay? And viruses are constantly shifting in order to be able to not be killed by some antivirus, So they'll mutate to survive. Okay, however, what was a virus, even after it mutates to survive, is still a virus. And actually, the scientists that are skeptical have pointed out that what actually happens that allows a virus to survive as some antivirus is actually a damage of its form, not some new development, some new healthy form, but just a damaging. It sounds strange, but I'll give you an example where a damage can make you more survivable. The example as commonly is given for this is sickle cell anemia that some Africans have in Africa, and some African Americans carry the sickle cell anemia gene. Now, when you carry the gene for sickle cell anemia, you don't always have the disease, but if you do, you have terrible tiredness and a low blood cells. Okay, so. But however, so why does it exist? It turns out that it just so happens that the damage to the gene in sickle cell anemia makes the person less susceptible to malaria. Therefore, when a malaria epidemic goes through Africa, it kills a lot of people that don't carry sickle cell anemia, and a lot of people that carry the sickle cell anemia gene survive the malaria epidemic. But it's not really evolution. It's actually devolution. It's actually a damaging of the genes. So a lot of what the Darwinists call evolution is actually just damaging of genes. See, these mutations that they rely on to talk about really are mutations, like that they are something is damaged, something's wrong. It's not a new development, new creature that's viable. The only viability is purely accidental. Give an example, like, let's say that this same terrible king who now has this all white kingdom, he only likes stupid women. And so he has them come and they ask them some questions, and if they can answer them, he kills them. Well, after a while, everybody's going to be stupid. But that's not really evolution. There's another thing I want to mention. Now, the people who like to lecture on Darwin's theory, and they're very enthusiastic, they often point out an older theory that animals changed because of sort of like a stretching in a particular direction. So, for instance, like giraffes, the old idea was that giraffes, they're straining their necks. So over time, they get longer and longer necks because somehow the genes have a memory of that effort. Until finally, they can eat the leaves at the top, way up in the tree that the other animals can't, the ones they were trying to get at. Okay, well, the new idea said, well, that's just not the way it works. The way it works is that it's just accidents in neck size, but because at a certain height you have better leaf eating, they're going to live longer and have more progeny, and then they're going to spread their progeny more because they're eating more leaves and living longer and having babies longer. Okay, that's the idea. Can you imagine any of this actually being true? It's so silly. It takes so many millions of years before you can get to those leaves. If you look at these trees in Africa that they're eating out of, there isn't leaves lower down, So you gotta wait till your neck reaches there before you can start doing any eating. Anyway, however, the arguments they have are still just like the idea of the giraffe. Okay, so, well, one of them is so silly, I don't even know what to say. And the sad thing is that there's otherwise seemingly intelligent people that just buy this. Maybe the listener will buy it too. I'm going to try to show what's wrong with it. Okay, the notion is that the way human beings became erect, meaning their heads right at the top, and not bent over and like knuckle walkers, like big apes, where they use their knuckles sort of like front legs sometimes, and sometimes they stand up. The reason that we got full bipedalism, full uprightness, is because the grasses were taller in the savanna in Africa. The grasses either got taller or there was more grasses. And so therefore, it was beneficial to stand upright because then you could see over the grass. Okay, it's very silly, very, very dumb. Okay, first of all, anybody who studied Africa knows that these grasses are just limited where they are. You can walk around them, you can walk out of them. It's just ridiculous that you'll spend millions of years waiting to be able to see over them. Also, there were many animals coexisting with the hominids. Too many to name, okay, in Africa. Why didn't any of them develop this capacity to see over the savanna grass? Wouldn't it have benefited them too? So while one is changing, none of the others are. Okay. The notion is that what's causing the evolution is external. It's something in the environment. So here they pick the grasses. The problem with it is that there are other things in the environment that aren't changing. The environment's identical, but the other things are staying the same. To show how problematic this is, let's turn to the ocean. There are creatures that have evolved in the ocean in the last so many millions of years. Now, there are also jellyfish in the ocean that have been there for 100 million years, okay? Many orders longer than those newer things that evolved. But the same environment was there. So why, and it's not just the jellyfish, it's everything that evolved during the period of explosion of species like jellyfish, the invertebrates. Why didn't if something changed in the ocean to cause something at the top of the spectrum of evolution, why didn't it change the objects at the lower order of the spectrum? There's something wrong, okay? Something else has to be causing the evolution. Something internal to the species. Now, the other thing I want to point out here is that a Darwinist will get very upset. Well, it's even some of the language that I just used, because they'll say, top of the spectrum, bottom of the spectrum, there's no top or bottom. Nothing's any better or higher than anything else. Evolution's not going anywhere. It's just random change. It's just random breaks in the Xerox, you know? It's just a bad copy. That's all that happens. That's all that actually positively happens. The rest is selection. That's just not true. Evolution, absolutely, without any equivocation and without any exception at all, always increases the amount of consciousness that the creature has. If we start with gases and stones, we certainly have, if any, what Mayor Baba would call almost none, but not nil. That's what he says. But certainly, nobody would say that a rock or carbon dioxide is as conscious as a giraffe. The giraffe's more conscious, and the giraffe's more conscious than the flies that are buzzing around it. Okay. Now, the other thing about evolution is that it is false that evolution is happening all the time, all around us. Absolutely, unequivocally false. If you take nearly any living species on the earth that's in nature, I'm not talking about a domesticated one, and you go back to where it first is found in the fossil record, you will not find change. There have been falsified changes, such as in the horse, and I have to get to that in another talk. There's a guy who talks about that. or these just are assembled to look like they're evolving. Species stay as they are. The shape, okay? The form, okay, oh, this is a good way to explain this. There are actually two processes going on in nature at all times. The evolutionist ignores one because it doesn't work in his narrative, and he only looks at the other. So one of them is homeostasis. That means there is a tendency in nature for a thing to stay the same. Stasis. Okay, homeo, stay the same it's as itself. So, so over time, there are dynamics that actually prevent change from occurring in a form. So one of those, as many know, if you keep breeding a horse, it'll eventually create an infertile hybrid called a mule. I think I have that right. And this is where evolution is not allowing further change, okay? And we'll also find in a book called Darwin Retried, there's a process known to breeders where if you continue to breed an animal in a particular direction, eventually it'll snap back to its original primordial shape. So an example he gives is of pigeons. Pigeons that are bred and bred and bred, and then suddenly they snap back to the original rock pigeon from nature. Because there's like this pressure to sustain the form, not a pressure from the environment. You know, the notion is that it's just always breaking, but there are things that are actually causing it to get back to the status quo, a species. As a matter of fact, the process of natural selection and survival of the fittest is actually a process in nature that supports homeostasis. Let's give an example. In a tribe or family of some creature like, you know, big apes or wolves, it's the paradigm example of the form that breeds the alpha male. It's not the deviant, strange thing with a funny tail. That is not what is getting reproduced. What's getting reproduced is the perfect example of the form. Also, the perfect ideal example of the form is most adapted to its environment. It tends to be the smartest in things it needs to know, the strongest in things it needs to be strong in, and therefore, evolution is actually, the survival of the fittest means the survival of the status quo. The paradigm example of the form. Not the deviant, strange mutation. That's not the creature that's usually going to be preserved by nature. The one that's going to get eaten by the lion is the mutant. It's not the paradigm form of the species. Like, you know, if you had a bunch of gazelles, and this is, you know, they're all galloping, and then there's one that's having a hard time keeping up, that's the one they're going to eat, because he sticks out. So it's not trying to find something unique. It's trying to select out uniqueness. Okay, so there's homeostasis. The other thing is change. There is change because we see there are different forms in nature. But that one has to have a different cause than the environment. The environment doesn't work for the various reasons that I've pointed out. Also, the examples of it going on all around us are not sustained when you look closer. The examples that they give us of such mutation, evolution is really just change in size or color or feather types or something very, what's called phenotypes, okay? that are biologically irrelevant. It's the same form. Whether I'm a black man with kinky hair and a flat nose and I'm 7 feet tall, Watusi, or I'm a little person from the Marshall Islands and I'm 5 feet tall, very pale, kind of wide and chunky, it's the same form. If you look, I've tried to describe the human form when I used the Leonardo da Vinci drawing of the human being and pointed out that you can do a perfect circle using the navel as the center of a human form. And that's actually represented in that drawing. And you can do a perfect square if you use the groin, top of the head, and the fingers extended to the sides. You have a perfect square. So that form is the same in the Marshallese person, or the Watusi, or the pygmy, or however you choose. It's always going to be there, because that's the form. The form is geometric, conceptually geometric. Certainly not phenotypes. So what Meher Baba says is that what's really going on is there is a process that he describes in God Speaks, which I would have to use his charts to explain, because it's hard for me. But it has to do with the impressions from a previous life get worked off in the next, and this keeps requiring more and more advanced media to do the same work that was done in the past. And so this process, which happens while the soul, what he calls the soul, is acquiring more and more consciousness, it does this through this process of sanskaras, which he describes in God Speaks. So what's pushing is an inward urge to be for knowledge and awareness of reality, and it's expressed in the fossil record as a series of creatures which have greater and greater capacity to experience. Nervous systems get better, they don't get worse, regardless of what that means for survival. There is a pattern in nature, in the advancing stream of life, and things are at the top and they are at the bottom, and that's not supported by Darwinism. They have to just deny it's there, because there can be no patterns in a system of accidents. Okay? So, I advocate for Meher Baba's advancing stream of life, consciousness factory, and I do not advocate for Darwinism. And that's all I've got to say. I hope this was enjoyable for someone. Thank you very much.